I want to take a few moments and share with you my personal journey to becoming a professional real estate photographer, some regrets along the way, some things that led to success. But if I knew then the things that I know now and that I've been able to apply, then life would have been a lot easier. And I really debated on whether I should do a video like this because I'm not really one to just talk about myself. You know that I've got a tutorial channel here, and that's really based on helping you grow and learn about real estate photography. But I realized also after getting a lot of requests about how do I get clients? What do I do about expanding the market? I know a lot of that is based off of life experience. So I just wanted to briefly share these things with you and how you can apply some of the lessons that I learned to your journey as a photographer as well. Now, the first thing is that, like you and many of you out there, I started with a camera at a very young age. So this is 2025 and I'm about 62 years old right now. But when I was about 7, 8 years old, I got a camera from my brother who was developing his photographs in a little darkroom that he made in the basement of our house. And I fell in love with photography. I always had a love for photography from a very young age, but it was very cost prohibitive. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. So as time went on, eventually digital cameras came out and I really pursued photography. So it was always there in the background. What led me to then have a career of something that would pay the bills, well, I went into engineering. So I was an engineer for many years, and I used to be a mechanical engineer, which back in the day when we were using AutoCAD, eventually in the early 1990s came out this program called Photoshop that we would use along with AutoCAD to do some of our graphic arts work on a lot of our mechanical drawings. Eventually, when the tech industry came out, I became a software engineer, but all along the way, photography was always there with me. Now, eventually, when digital cameras really started advancing, I got into doing some more art with my photography because I didn't have to pay for all the developmental costs and I could do a lot of photo manipulation in Photoshop. So I started hiring models on the weekends to come into my house and I would set up these different stages and sets and we would do photo shoots, and it was mostly fitness people. That led to then other athletes paying me to come out and be photographed. Some people would fly into California and book an appointment with me. And that was great. I could only do it on the weekends because I was still a full-time engineer. Then I noticed one day there was a house going up for sale right across the street. And I noticed this guy walk in with a tripod in his hand and a backpack. And I knew right away, that must be the photographer who's going to take pictures of the house. All of a sudden, bells went off. I mentioned this to my wife who's been very supportive over all my hobbies, all my interests, all my endeavors. She was like, maybe that's something you could pursue. So I looked into it a little bit more and things just weren't going very well. So back at the time, this is back at around maybe 2011, 2012, and really cameras weren't that affordable for full frame. I did get a D600 like around 2012 when they first came out, got a D610 when that came out in, 2013. But as I started trying this real estate photography, I'd done a lot of HDR photography in the past, and I also used a lot of lighting for a lot of the custom portrait work that I did when I was shooting the athletes. Lighting back then was very difficult, so much different than what it is now, because we didn't have a lot of wireless remotes. I was using the Paul C. Buff line. So I was using Einsteins. If you're familiar with alien bees, the Einsteins were really just a step above. They're really, really good lights. But, you know, there was no remote access to them unless you had your own separate triggers. There really wasn't any AD200, AD400, nothing by Godox that had this variety of light that we have now that's all wireless and very lightweight. So it was a cumbersome thing, and I couldn't imagine dragging this stuff out with me back then to a house to photograph it. So I'm trying HDR and it's just not going very well. One of the main reasons being is that I kind of had high standards. So a lot of photographers today, I've watched this happen over the years. They'll get into real estate photography thinking this is a booming business, and it is. Real estate photography is one of the genres of photography where you can get steady work. I'm proof of that. I've had a successful career of it. But back then, there was a little choice. It's like, well, we might have to do HDR here if I'm going to get into this. until I saw a video once, and it was by a guy by the name of Rich Baum, and he was in the real estate photography group on Facebook. And those groups nowadays on Facebook, they are nothing like they were years ago. They were filled with people that were trying to figure this stuff out. Very helpful. It was a really good community of photographers. So Rich showed, it's like, oh, if you use some flash and you take an ambient shot, you use luminosity mode, you can do this flambient. It wasn't even named flambient. We don't even know who came up with that name, quite honestly. It just kind of evolved over the years. So that led me into the idea that I can probably pursue this a little bit more. So with Rich's advice, I took that further. Being the engineer that I was, I started experimenting at home and figuring how fast could I do this, timing myself. How fast could I get into a property? How fast could I get out? What are my results going to look like? And what can I do to take shortcuts compared to the higher end lighting that I had used for so many years in my other photography work? So basically, we were all left to figure this out on our own. And all the while getting criticized for it, because it's like, oh, that's going to take too long. Other photographers seeing, that myself and Rich Baum and some other photographers were using this new flambient method. It's like, you'll never make any money off that. I'm thinking to myself, well, if I can't take good photos, why am I getting into this genre? I'll just get into something else. So I started doing that. I started getting hired by some realtors. I started out with one friend that we have who was a realtor, hired me, and immediately she was getting asked by other agents, who takes your photos? Oh my God. Well, it wasn't hard to compete. I was basically the one-eyed man in the world of the blind, because the only thing out there was just really low-end photography in our area. And I'm not to say that HDR is low-end photography, but compared to flash, it is. So there was a world of difference on what I was able to provide, but it was taking me too long, and I needed to reduce that time. What happened while I'm still refining this flambient technique and whatnot using flash, I'm getting a lot of requests to come out and shoot properties. Well, here I am just doing this part-time at first. Eventually, I had to make a decision. I had so much work that was starting to pile up. I had to make a decision. Should I pursue real estate photography, which seems to be a viable career path, or should I stay on the known path and the path that's most trodden, and that was being an engineer? Well, fate kind of made that decision for me. So being an engineer, I went from contract to contract to contract. I was lucky enough to work on big contracts, like I was a senior software engineer for the redesign of Kia Motors America, also the National Weather Service with NOAA, WebMD, variety of different projects. I'd gotten into some pre-IPO companies, and that was good, but all these are always temporary when you're working in technology. So I had another contract that could be coming up. One was coming to an end, and it was a good point to say, you know what, let me try real estate photography for a while, and if it doesn't work out, then I'll flip back over, I'll just start getting other contracts and go back into tech. But I was never happy working as an engineer. Sure, when I first started out doing it, satisfying the curiosity, seeing things come together that you had designed and then now they're built and people are using them, that was fantastic. I remember when USB first came out, we were in the labs making that. So it's amazing today to see USB and to know that, hey, I took a little part in that. That was fantastic. But I wasn't happy. I was having a lot of problems with anxiety, a lot of problems with stress, had physical manifestations of them that I won't necessarily get into here in this video. But I knew I had to make a career change. The biggest thing is I wanted to be happy overall. I could run all the numbers I wanted to all day long on a spreadsheet, it didn't matter. So I did go full-time then into real estate photography, and the first lesson that I learned that I want to share with you is that I wish I would have done it sooner. One, I was at the time, I'm 62 now, I was approaching 50 years old, and I'm at the middle of a career change. Should I have maybe done this earlier? Because now I'm going to have to work harder as I have to worry about more aches and pains that I have to deal with, right? So I wish I would have started it sooner. And that's my first thing for you. There's a lot more that I want to share with you, if you don't mind. But that was the first thing. I wish I would have really started this whole thing sooner. It didn't take long that things built up, but the first year I did this was terrible. I look back at the income and it was a fraction of what I make right now, but I kept going, I kept persisting. And this is the second thing, is that you don't give up. One of the things I learned is don't give up. Now, I learned that also in engineering, and other engineers that I'd hire to be on my teams. If they gave up too quickly, they just didn't last. You have to have that persistence to be able to not get frustrated and set everything down or try to take shortcuts. I see too many photographers nowadays try flambient, try using lighting, other advanced techniques, and they just revert to HDR. And they're just, it's too hard. I'm never going to make any money doing this. And it's like, well, if you invest your time and you learn how to do this right, it will, because I did it. I'm proof of it, right? And a lot of other photographers are. But if you're just going to give up, then you're not going to go anywhere. So you can't give up. And sure enough, the second year, my income doubled. Now, some of that was because I got faster. I got better at what I was doing, but also people saw the difference in what I was doing, and I started to become higher in demand. That also led to me doing what I call price throttling. And price throttling is where I'm in demand enough. I don't have an open enough schedule. If you want to hire me, you're going to have to pay more. Well, eventually my prices started climbing up, and within 2 years, I doubled my prices. So that helped out a lot as far as the income. I was, though, so overjoyed with what was happening because my life immediately got better. I was finally happy. I had finally pursued a lifelong dream. Seriously, getting my first camera as just a young boy and loving photography so much. Now I could do it all day long. It was a dream come true. Now, there's been bad days, there's been good days. Not every career is the perfect career, but I'm so much happier now because of the struggle that I went through. And that then, when you really love what you're doing, they say, oh, do what you love, the money will follow. Well, in a large degree, it does. But I was so happy with it, I wanted to share this with everybody. That's how this YouTube channel started. As I'm seeing that, look, this isn't that complicated. You can really take good photos. If you love photography, you can take really good real estate photos, and that can get you into higher paying markets, which then it did with me. It wasn't long, after just a few years, I was shooting, the best that I could. I was swinging for the fences, not taking any shortcuts. That then led into higher paying work. All of a sudden, I'm getting calls from these companies that do remodel. And they want to hire me to go out there and shoot their remodeled kitchens and whatnot, do stuff for their advertisements. Same thing happened. Builders started reaching out to me. And all along the way, this led to one big lesson that I learned. And that's that if you have to keep marketing yourself over and over and over again by buying Facebook ads or Google ads or sending out mass mailers, you're doing it wrong. Because if you're really good at what you do, and I'm not saying I'm the best, but if you're really good at what you do, people are going to seek you out. Word will spread. And something in real estate photography that is so often overlooked is that every time you shoot a property, those photos are going to be seen by just about every realtor in your area. That's because it goes on your multiple listing service or some other type of listing service, depending on the country that you're in. In the United States, we call it the MLS. But they see that because they might have a potential buyer for that property. If your photos stand out, then that agent is going to ask the agent that hired you, that's listing the property, who does your photos? So big lesson here. My marketing budget after the first year went to zero. I pay nothing for my marketing, yet I'm busier today than I ever was in the past. After a few years, it got to the point where I was making more money doing real estate photography than I did in my most profitable years of being an engineer. And it's easy enough to do. If you've been doing real estate photography long enough, you know that there is potential there. No matter where you live, no matter what your geographic region is, there are customers that are going to be willing to pay you good money for good work. And this is often too overgeneralized. You'll hear a lot of photographers say that realtors are cheap. You can't make any money in this industry. Let me tell you something. When I first decided to do this, word got out to another one of my realtor friends who said, why would Nathan ever think about getting into real estate photography? There's no money in that. You have to deal with realtors. They're a pain. They're always so cheap. That's got to be frustrating. Why doesn't he just stay an engineer? Well, look at me now. Right? I mean, I have a happy career. I'm also not rushing around from house to house to house dealing with just dime a dozen realtors. I'm not criticizing realtors overall. But if you've ever worked with a variety of realtors, you know, and I've said this before on my channel, only about 20% of all realtors will ever make it past 2 years. So the 80% isn't what I targeted. Now, my first couple years, I would take on anybody. But as I got to be higher in demand, then the ones who were real cheap just never hired me. But the ones that were seeking out really good work did. And nowadays, I do about 50% architectural photography and 50% for the listing market, things that I cover in various videos, and I've got links to that down in the description of this video. But also, that then led to more training information. So my YouTube channel kept going, and when I had some time, I put out a video like, oh my gosh, you won't believe what I just discovered. This is how you do yada, yada, yada. And new videos would come out. And then somebody suggested that perhaps I could come up with an instruction manual that they would pay me for it. That's how my books started. I started with just one. It was the interiors book that I have. And now there's about 9 books that I came out with since then, because there was different topics people were interested in. And then people shortly after that were saying, well, do you have courses? Do you have online courses that you can teach this? And I postponed that for a long time because here I am working full-time as a real estate photographer. The books already took a lot of effort. I'm trying to maintain this YouTube channel, but my kids are all grown, right? I have 4 grandkids right now. My kids are all grown. My wife is extremely supportive over everything I did. Mentioned it to her, and she was like, what are you waiting for? Do it. Put the courses together. My ex-drone guy, Jonathan Dannenfelser, you might have known, he passed away from a heart condition back a couple years ago. Before he did, one of the things he stressed with me is get on those courses, start making courses. This is where it's at. And of course, he ended his sentences in a preposition. I don't, I try not to. But Jonathan, I pay homage to him. And one of the things was that he encouraged me to come up with those courses. But the reason why they were made was so that I could help you find the same joy in life that I did. And that's no lie. Look, I was very unhappy when I was an engineer. Sure, the money was great. But the hours that I would put in, the drudgery of it, dealing with corporate America, tired of it. I didn't want to have that. I didn't like being stuck in a cubicle all day long. Now I get to travel. I get to drive to different places. And if you want to, yes, you can travel outside of the country even. I don't. I've got family here and I don't like to be that far from them. But still, I get to be out in the field. I usually work about half a day in the field, taking on nowadays like 2 shoots in the morning. I get to edit those in the afternoon and make some good money doing it. And if you're wondering about the prices, I'll leave some videos to that also down in the description of this video so you can get an idea how you can make that. Because you can still make, just shooting a couple of shoots a day, if you price it right, you can still make 6 figures a year. That's really not hard to do doing real estate photography. But through all this, some of the biggest lessons I learned are this. 1, if you have a love for photography, pursue it. Pursue it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Look, we have one life on this earth, and that is it. If you don't pursue the things you want to, you're going to get to be my age and look back and you're going to have regrets. You're going to have more regrets the older you get. So do you want to have that? Well, no. I mean, I look back and my regret is that I didn't start the career of my choice and my passion sooner than what I did. Sure, gotta pay the bills, but you have to decide how you want to live your life. And part of that is deciding if you want to be happy. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to kind of tangential with that I mentioned, is that you don't want to take the advice of just everybody because more than half of that is going to be negative. So everybody tends to be caught up in the standard workaday world, not thinking of anything being creative. They look at anybody in any artistic field as being a dreamer and not making a lot of money, the starving artist stereotype. Well, that's just not true. Now, if all I ever did was shoot the athletes, sure, there would be some limited income with that. But there is real income in certain genres of photography, like weddings, right? Commercial photography, doing advertisements, and also real estate photography. So if you really want to pursue it, do it. Do it. And you know, you can sit down with all the spreadsheets you want. You can also do a little bit of stuff for viability. It's something I teach in my business and marketing course for real estate photography. It's also in my business and marketing book. but finding that viability if you want to. But the thing is, if you don't try, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And if you don't try, you will regret it. I guarantee you will regret it later in life. If you try and you fail, so what? You at least tried, and you're going to learn something along the way. Another big thing that I learned along the way was keep your money in your pocket, right? Don't be spending money on all the flashy new gear that comes out. When I first started doing this, and I really wanted to go full time, well, the D600 had just come out. Well, people back then were criticizing any of us that owned a D600 because it wasn't a professional camera. It was a 24 megapixel full frame camera. Everything I was doing was in manual mode. I knew how to take photos. Every photo that you love from the past was taken with an outdated camera because that's what it'd be seen as today. The thing is, if you go to my portfolio on my website on nathancoolphoto.com, all those photos were taken with either a D600, a D610, or a Nikon Z5. That's the camera I'm using today, a Nikon Z5. And people go, oh, that's just a consumer camera. Well, no, it's not. It's a 24 megapixel mirrorless full frame camera. And that's what I use for my work, even my architectural work. The thing is, if you know how to take good photos, you don't need to have a camera to try to compensate for it. In fact, most of the flashy stuff that really raises the price on modern gear, you don't need it for most genres of photography. The other lesson too, and I learned this very early on and applied it, but I see so many photographers not apply this, and that's that you need to have persistence. Don't give up. Don't take shortcuts. If something isn't working, try it and try it and try it again. You have to remember that in any business that you do, especially any that's involving a skill trade, like photography, is that you will take the first year a loss. I did, right? I made half of what I did the second year, and I make a lot more than that now. Because if you start taking shortcuts, you're going to put an end to your career path. You're going to plateau. You're just going to reach a certain level, and that's it. Let's take HDR, for example. And yes, here's something for all you HDR photographers out there. You can get some good pictures some of the times. You won't get great pictures all of the time. And all that you're going to do, especially if you're just doing HDR photography and you're just farming this out to have some outsourced editor correct all your mistakes, you're going to do nothing more than compete one-to-one with everybody else in your area. You will have no advantage. There's no way that you can sustain any business if you don't have an advantage over your competitors. So if you're looking at real estate photography as a career, you need to, just like any other career, find ways that you can stand out. And that means a lot of things. One, having better quality, having better customer service, and having persistence to figure all of that out. So here I am at 62 years old, sharing with you what it took to become a real estate photographer. I've shot literally many thousands of homes. I've worked with hundreds of clients, and am I ready to retire? No way. I mean, there's no freaking way I'm going to retire. Sure, I still feel young and healthy. I can't tell what the future will hold. I'm not necessarily in control of all that, but what I can do is keep pursuing my passion. And until my body gives out and I can't do this anymore, I'm not going to retire. My plan, I've told all my clients, is to do this well into my 70s. I'd love to do this in my 80s if I lived that long, right? Until I can't get out there anymore and do this, I want to keep pursuing it. Finally, after a lifetime of a passion that was always something in the background, I was able to take it to the forefront and pursue photography as a career. Why would I ever want to give that up? And I hope you also don't give it up. I hope that whatever you do with photography, whether it's real estate, whether it's anything else, and by the way, it's always a combination. I don't just shoot real estate, I do it also for fun. But never give up. This is something that when you really love something, you have to satisfy the dreams of your life. Remember, you aren't going to be here forever, and you don't want, in your older age, to be looking back and having regrets that you did not live the life that you could have, and wondering what things might have been.